January 1954. Deep in the rugged mountains of northwestern Vietnam, tens of thousands of soldiers waited for the order to attack. For weeks, they had dragged heavy artillery through steep mountains, dense forests, and endless mud. Every meter gained came at a cost measured in sweat, and sometimes in blood. At last, everything was ready. The guns were in position, the ammunition had arrived, the units had received their orders, the attack date had been set. Then, at the most critical moment, the commander made a decision that stunned everyone. Pull the artillery back! Many could hardly believe what they had heard. The guns that had taken weeks of sacrifice to move into place would now be pulled back out. The entire plan seemed to be falling apart. Yet that decision would change history, and the man who made it was not a graduate of a prestigious military academy. He had once been a history teacher. His name was Vo Nguyen Giap. To understand why that decision mattered so much, we must return to the final months of 1953. The First Indochina War had already lasted nearly 8 years. France was exhausted. The cost of the war continued to rise. Political pressure was growing. Paris needed a decisive victory, a victory large enough to force the Viet Minh into submission. The man chosen for that task was General Henri Navarre, an experienced officer, a commander who believed deeply in the power of modern warfare. Navarre had no interest in an endless war of attrition. He wanted a decisive battle, a battle where French superiority in firepower, air support, and logistics could finally crush the enemy. The location he chose was Dien Bien Phu, a remote valley surrounded by mountains in northwestern Vietnam. Beginning in late 1953, thousands of French paratroopers were dropped into the area. Within months, one of the strongest military fortresses in Indochina had been created. Nearly 50 defensive positions, hundreds of bunkers, layers of barbed wire, minefields, heavy artillery, tanks, and a central airfield capable of receiving supplies every day. The fortress was commanded by Colonel Christian de Castries, a respected French officer. He believed his defenses could withstand any attack. And it was not only the French who were confident. By 1954, the United States was financing much of France's war effort in Indochina. Aircraft, weapons, ammunition, equipment, all continued to flow into the battlefield. For many Western strategists at the time, Dien Bien Phu was seen as the best opportunity to destroy the Viet Minh's main forces. Some American military advisors believed that if the Viet Minh accepted battle in the valley, they would be crushed by superior French firepower. Military assessments of the period suggested that the balance of power favored France, and that Dien Bien Phu would become the place where the war would finally be decided on French terms. Many Western military observers believed that Dien Bien Phu would become the graveyard of the Viet Minh. Above all, the French believed one thing: the Vietnamese could never move heavy artillery into the mountains surrounding the valley. According to conventional military logic, it was nearly impossible. Some French officers even welcomed the idea of a Viet Minh assault. That confidence was so strong that General Henri Navarre almost welcomed the prospect of a major Viet Minh attack. He believed Dien Bien Phu offered the perfect opportunity to force the enemy into a conventional battle, a battle where French artillery, air power, and defensive strength would prevail. To many French officers, the Viet Minh appeared to be marching toward an inevitable defeat. They believed any attack would end in disaster for the Vietnamese. Not a battle, but a massacre. By every military calculation of the time, Dien Bien Phu appeared impossible to defeat, a perfect trap. What the French did not know was that on the other side of the battlefield, a former history teacher was preparing to write the most important chapter of his life. Vo Nguyen Giap was born in 1911 in Quang Binh Province. From an early age, he was known as an exceptional student. He loved books and he was fascinated by history. As a young man, he became a teacher at Thang Long School in Hanoi. The subject he taught was history. He studied revolutions, famous military campaigns, and some of the greatest commanders in world history, especially Napoleon Bonaparte. Years later, Giap would describe himself as a self-taught general, but his life was shaped by more than books. Under French colonial rule, his family suffered greatly. His father died, Several relatives were arrested. His first wife, Nguyen Thi Quang Thai, was imprisoned by the colonial authorities. She later died in prison. These tragedies left a deep mark on him. In the early 1940s, he met a man who had changed the course of his life, Ho Chi Minh, the leader of Vietnam's independence movement. Ho Chi Minh quickly recognized something special in the young teacher: strategic thinking, organizational skill, discipline, and the ability to inspire others. What made this remarkable was that Giap had never attended a military academy, yet Ho Chi Minh placed enormous trust in him, a trust that would help shape the future of Vietnam. By late 1944, the Second World War was still raging. Vietnam's future remained uncertain. It was during this turbulent period that Ho Chi Minh entrusted Vo Nguyen Giap with a remarkable mission: to build the first armed force of the Vietnamese Revolution. On December 22, 1944, in a forest clearing in Cao Bang Province, the Vietnam Propaganda Liberation Army was formed. Its entire strength consisted of just 34 fighters, a handful of old rifles, a few pistols, very limited ammunition, and almost no modern equipment. To an outside observer, it looked like a small group hidden deep in the mountains, nothing more. No one could have imagined that this tiny force would become the foundation of the modern Vietnamese army. And even fewer could have imagined that its commander, a history teacher with no formal military training, would one day defeat one of the most powerful colonial armies in the world. But Giap understood something important. The strength of an army is not measured only by weapons. It is measured by discipline, organization, determination, and belief in a cause greater than oneself. Over the next 10 years, those 34 fighters would grow into a force capable of changing history, and their greatest tests still lay ahead. To defeat Dien Bien Phu, Vo Nguyen Giap needed something the French believed was impossible: heavy artillery. But there was a problem. Dien Bien Phu was surrounded by rugged mountains and dense jungle. There were no major roads, no modern transportation network, and no massive military convoys like those used by Western armies. According to French calculations, the Viet Minh could never move heavy artillery into the mountains overlooking the valley. That belief became one of the foundations of French confidence. But there was one factor they underestimated: human determination. Tens of thousands of soldiers, civilian laborers, young volunteers, and ordinary villagers from across Vietnam joined an enormous logistical effort. Day and night, they cut roads through jungles, built bridges, crossed rivers, and carved pathways through mountains. Massive artillery pieces were pulled by hand, across steep slopes, through mud, through rain, and through terrain many believed was impassable. In some places, every meter gained required extraordinary sacrifice. Yet one of the most important weapons of the campaign was not a gun. It was a bicycle. Thousands of bicycles were reinforced with bamboo, wood, and steel. They carried food, ammunition, medicine, and supplies essential for survival. Some were capable of transporting more than 200 kilograms of cargo. Military historians would later describe the logistical operation at Dien Bien Phu as one of the most remarkable achievements of the 20th century. Day by day, the impossible became reality. The artillery that the French believed could never reach the mountains was slowly moving into position. But this logistical achievement did not come without sacrifice. Along the rugged mountain trails, many never returned home. Civilian laborers, young volunteers, and soldiers who worked day and night to keep the front lines supplied. They faced air attacks, disease, hunger, exhaustion, and constant danger in the mountains and forests. Many lost their lives. Yet those behind them continued forward, because they understood that every sack of rice delivered to the battlefield and every round of ammunition carried to the trenches could help determine the outcome of the campaign. And it was this determination that became one of the greatest strengths behind the victory at Dien Bien Phu. By early 1954, preparations for the Dien Bien Phu campaign were nearly complete. The artillery was in position. The ammunition had been delivered. The troops were ready. The original strategy was straightforward: strike fast, win quickly, concentrate firepower, break through the defenses, and end the battle in a short period of time. But the more Giap studied the battlefield, the more concerned he became. French defenses were stronger than expected. Their firepower was greater than expected. A direct assault could result in devastating losses. During those difficult days, he remembered the words Ho Chi Minh had spoken before the campaign. A short message, but one that carried enormous weight. This battle is extremely important. Fight only when victory is certain. If victory is not certain, do not fight. Those words remained with him. He understood that a failure at Dien Bien Phu could alter the entire course of the war. The pressure was immense. Tens of thousands of soldiers were waiting for orders. Months of preparation had already been completed. Everything pointed toward immediate attack. And yet, he made the hardest decision of his military career. Pull the artillery back. Many were stunned. Some were disappointed. They knew the sacrifices that had been made to bring those guns into the mountains. But Giap chose the more difficult path. He abandoned the possibility of a quick victory in exchange for the possibility of a certain one. The artillery was withdrawn. The original plan was abandoned. Years later, Giap would recall that this was one of the most difficult moments of his military career. Every option carried enormous risks. Every decision could affect the fate of tens of thousands of people. For several nights, he slept very little, torn between the possibility of a rapid victory and the responsibility to ensure success at any cost. And a completely new strategy began to take shape. A strategy that would soon change the course of history. After ordering the artillery to be withdrawn, Vo Nguyen Giap completely changed his strategy. Instead of a rapid assault, he adopted a new approach. Fight steadily, advance steadily. It was not the fastest path, but it offered the greatest chance of victory. Over the following weeks, artillery positions were rebuilt, defensive preparations were strengthened, supply routes continued to expand, and most importantly, an enormous network of trenches began to surround Dien Bien Phu. On March 13, 1954, the battle officially began. The first artillery barrages crashed into French positions. The French were stunned. The guns they believed could never reach the mountains were now firing down into the valley from above. The first major target was Beatrice, known in Vietnamese history as Him Lam. After fierce fighting, the strong point fell. Then came Gabrielle, known as Doc Lap, and then more positions followed. One after another, the ring around Dien Bien Phu tightened. Meanwhile, the Viet Minh trench system continued moving forward, day after day, night after night, meter by meter. The distance between the two sides grew smaller. French soldiers called it a war of moles, because their enemies seemed to emerge from the earth itself. As the battle continued, French control of the airfield began to collapse. Artillery fire made landings increasingly dangerous. Supply aircraft were shot down. Others failed to deliver their cargo. Food became scarce. Ammunition began to run low. Conditions inside the fortress grew desperate. Inside his command bunker, Colonel Christian de Castries repeatedly requested reinforcements. More supplies, more support, a way out. But time was no longer on France's side. One by one, the defensive positions fell. The fortress, once believed to be unbreakable, was becoming a trap for its own defenders. The battle lasted 56 days. 56 days of artillery fire, 56 days of trench warfare, 56 days of endurance and sacrifice. Finally, on the afternoon of May 7, 1954, Vietnamese forces launched their final assault. The remaining defenses collapsed. The victory flag was raised above the command bunker. Christian de Castries was captured alive. The Battle of Dien Bien Phu was over. France was shocked. The world was stunned. News from Dien Bien Phu quickly spread around the world, from Paris to London to Washington. Many observers found it difficult to believe that a revolutionary army from a colonial territory had defeated a fortress built according to the most advanced military doctrines of its time. For the first time in the modern era, a colonial army had defeated a major European colonial power in a decisive battle. 10 years before Dien Bien Phu, Vo Nguyen Giap commanded a unit of only 34 fighters. 10 years later, he would command the campaign that changed world history. But what made him unforgettable was not victory alone. It was the way he chose to achieve it. At the most critical moment, he abandoned a plan that seemed almost perfect. He chose to slow down, in order to reduce losses. He chose to change course, in order to protect the chance of victory. Many military historians later argued that the decision to withdraw the artillery was one of the boldest and wisest command decisions in 20th-century military history. But perhaps what mattered even more was that Giap understood something fundamental. Behind every operational plan were human lives. After the victory at Dien Bien Phu, the Geneva Accords were signed. French colonial rule in Indochina came to an end, and a new chapter in Vietnamese history began. Today, Vo Nguyen Giap is remembered around the world, not because he commanded the largest army or possessed the most modern weapons, but because he proved that determination, strategy, and the ability to make the right decision at the hardest possible moment can change history. For Vo Nguyen Giap, that victory was never the achievement of one man alone. It was also the result of Ho Chi Minh's strategic leadership, the same leader who had trusted him from the very beginning when he was still a history teacher with a love for the past and no formal military training. He began his life as a history teacher, and in the end, he became part of history. That is the story of Vo Nguyen Giap, a man who made a decision, and that decision changed world history. If you want to discover more of Vietnam's history, from Ho Chi Minh, Vo Nguyen Giap, and Dien Bien Phu, to the people and events that shaped this country, subscribe to Vietnam in 60 seconds, share this video, and join us for the next story.